Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, we got a couple of questions in here. Awesome. Good afternoon, guys. We are going to be getting straight into it today with the live session. It's going to be one of those ones again, like we did last Friday or Thursday, I think it was, where we shared some X-rays. We're going to be doing that again today, and I didn't set this up. It just so happens that the set that we're going to be going through today, I'll just quickly flash it on screen for you guys. We're going to be going through this lumbar spine set of X-rays. It basically has the same sort of issue in the opposite way as we saw last time, and I'll flesh that out a little bit more when we go through everything. But really, one of the great things about this example here specifically that we're going to be talking about today is that more or less everybody, and I think in this case for these X-rays as well, when you guys first injure your lower back, when you first go and get some advice, guidance, whatever it may be, to help you with your lower back injury, so often the stretches are forward bend here, do some knee hugs, do some child's pose, etc., etc., etc. And these kind of forward bending exercises, forward bending activities, they are just reinforcing the problem. And I think just before I get into the actual X-rays themselves, understand that most people have normal anatomy. And what we're looking at on the standing X-rays is the curve in the lower back. And there are some considerations like we were talking about last time, where the optimal alignment, if you will, for one individual versus another is going to be slightly different based on the way in which their pelvis, their sacrum, and their hip joints are actually laid out. And that's since birth. And this is, again, something that we'll see on today's live session when we share the X-rays. But if anyone is likely to be having any kind of misalignment one way or another, it's most likely that they are going to have a flattened lumbar spine. It's most likely that they are going to have a loss of lumbar curve. And this is just my experience, having done thousands and thousands of these kind of images associated with lower back issues. It's worth bearing that in mind. And then we take a step back and say, well, why might this be the case? Why might the average person have absolutely no requirement for extra forward bending? Because the average person spends so much time sitting down every single day. They're sat down with a flattened, eliminated lumbar lordosis. So if you are an individual struggling with lower back pain, struggling with sciatica, the idea that you need even more forward bending is going to be, it's going to be a bit of a stretch. So guys, I'm going to go through the kind of the live presentation here of the images. But those of you guys on TikTok, on YouTube, etc., I'm going to come to the comments after I've done these. So we will go through all those questions, comments, etc., that you've got. Whether you've had a lower back issue, whether you've got sciatica, whether you've had microdiscectomies, etc. This will hopefully be quite insightful for you guys. And let's just jump in here and share everything. So just bear with me while I get the pen operational. So what we're looking at here on the left-hand side, some of you guys will remember, and I'm going to bring this up actually. Last week we reviewed Ella's X-rays, and she had a specific setup between the sacrum down here and the hips that we kind of talked about, meaning that for her, she might well need a little bit more lumbar curve. It's very, very interesting what we'll be discussing today with this set of X-rays on the right-hand side here. But if we look at the left image here, we've got the lumbar vertebra. They stack in this sort of alignment, and the back of these vertebrae all kind of line up along the green line. That's the kind of normal lumbar curvature. We're supposed to have a lordosis. This is what it looks like in reality. And it's worth bearing in mind, when the skin is about here. You can see the skin in this image here, it's going to be covering over about here. We have no clue what's happening in here unless we as an individual have X-ray vision, which we probably don't. So when people start talking about too much curve, too little curve, etc., there are all sorts of illusions that can come from the surface that can make it look like something's happening in the spine here that's actually not. The next important thing, and we spent a little bit of time talking about this the other day, is looking at where the bones are stacked over the hip joints, right? Particularly this section of the lumbar spine. We can see the two hip sockets here. We've got this vertical alignment, so it's very efficient for load bearing. Now, if we come over to the image here, we see the vertebrae, they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's all on the right-hand side, right? You can see the vertebrae numbered. And you can see the green line that's been put on here as well. And you can see the red line on the back of each of the vertebrae here, which obviously are not in the right place in this regard. And what we see is there is a gross reduction in the lumbar curve. This spine is too straight. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out, right? You can see it very clearly. It's very straight. Now, you don't know this unless you've got a frame of reference, right? if you've got a frame of reference for what normal is, you can very easily see, okay, this is too little curve or this is too much curve. And it's important to bear in mind, we don't want to necessarily obsess over this alignment side of things. It's very important that we don't too much, but where we can improve things, it's worthwhile considering. The other thing is, if we are in a position where we have a much flatter lumbar spine, we have to acknowledge what that does to the lumbar spine in so much as the discs. As we flex forwards, and what we're saying here is, as we flex forwards, we're squashing down through the lumbar discs. We are stretching the posterior parts of the segment, the ligaments, etc., that run in this section here. And that is the upright position. And I'm going off on a tangent here, but hopefully this will be really important. When you, and this because this pertains to the, let's say, apparent conflicting information that you get online. A lot of people that talk about maybe maybe misguided about the spine, say bend it, twist it, and all of those other kind of things, don't have the experience of working in a more intimate way with the spine, like I've just shared with you on the screen. And we'll come back to those things in a bit more detail. But the big problem is that when we're looking at the knee joint, right, I can see how much the knee joint is bending. I can see where it is when the person's standing up. If I was standing up with my knee joint and my knee was bending off backwards, I'd immediately know what's going on. I'd say, that's a little bit strange. But the problem is here that the individual on the x-ray, when they are stood upright like so, their spine is already bent forwards by a significant margin. It's already in the upright position, the spine is already bent forwards. And that's a really important thing, because you don't know that unless you see things. You don't know that. Now, do you need to know that? And I'm going to get to this a little bit later on. Do you need to know that in order to help the person get better? No. But if you know that you might see some things on the imaging that could inform the process a little bit more, the selection of certain activities starts to become a little bit more apparent. So for example, in this particular case, we have a flat lumbar spine. We measure this curve and it's 13 degrees. Under ordinary circumstances, 13 degrees here, if I could turn the pen back on again, we will get there eventually. There we are. So 13, there we go. 13 degrees. Okay, it should be 40. The way in which we measure these angles, I mentioned it last live session, right, is we take what's called a tangent angle. So we take a line along the back of the vertebra here, take a line along the back of the vertebra here, and we measure that angle. That's how we get these figures. This is 13, it should be 40. I'll get to the caveat in a moment. But knowing that we are already bent forwards in the standing upright position, we have a reduction in the curve here. Adding in extra flexion, adding in extra forward bending of the spine in what might be considered a therapeutic way, knee hugs, child's pose, etc., is only serving to move something that's already bending forward significantly in the resting neutral position for the human being and making it even worse. And what I will say with individuals with a flatter spine than there should be, like this, is that the towel is such a helpful tool. It's a free stretch that everybody can do. You place the towel underneath your lower back, you lie over it. It supports the natural lordosis of the lumbar spine. Often in scenarios like this, where we have a significant reduction in the lumbar curve, it does make things, it's a bit uncomfortable to start with, to say the least. And it's something that you kind of have to get into. It takes a little bit of time to get into that. But with time, it would become one of those stretches that is able to decompress the spine and support this natural alignment that you really, really like and really, really value. So that's a really important thing to bear in mind. Now, if we come back to the images here, I wanted to talk about this situation with regards to the pelvis, because what we see in this scenario is that the important angle that we talk about, the compression of L5-S1 in particular, someone's just said I had an L5-S1 herniation, right? You look at the angle, this is what the lumbar spine is sitting on. So when we look at the healthy lumbar spine here, it should sit on a slope. It shouldn't sit on too much of a slope. That's where we start talking about things like anterior pelvic tilt. The reason we want to know whether the person's pelvis is tilted one way or another is because if it's tilted a lot, then this slope here becomes very steep and the forces of shear at the level of the lower lumbar spine increase as the lumbar spine feels like it's trying to fall off the bottom. Now, it's important to bear in mind, right? And I just want to make this clear. If I do a hip hinge, right, and go into this position, there are shearing forces going through my lumbar spine, right? We are designed to take these forces. I don't want any confusion around that. We're designed to move in all sorts of directions. But when the individual has an injury, if they're stuck in an anterior pelvic tilt, then they constantly have this low-grade increase of shearing happening at the lower lumbar spine. But in this case that we see on the MRI, on the x-ray, sorry, we are actually stuck in a significant permanent posterior pelvic tilt at all times. So we just got that compression going through the L5-S1 disc. And we see two things at the L5-S1 disc. We've obviously got this bulge, if I recall correctly, but we also have the retrolisthesis in this particular set of x-rays. So when we jump back in here and we remove this here, we can see that the back part of S1 and the back part of L5, we've got this retrolisthesis where the vertebra is shearing backwards. Now, this is something that anecdotally I've seen a good amount of time over the years, normally associated with a flattening of the lumbar curve, or often associated with a flattening of the lumbar curve. And the best way that I could perhaps try to explain why this might occur is because the spine is injured and it's stiff and it's been flat for a long period of time. When the person tries to bend backwards, when you have an injury to the segment, we often get a degree of instability. And if there's a significant herniation, for example, the height between these two discs, the disc height drops quite a lot and there's damage to the soft tissues. So now that vertebra can shear forwards and backwards, left and right. So when the person tries to stand up, instead of bending backwards, the vertebra at L5-S1 shears backwards. And we get this, it's generally a self-limiting retrolisthesis. It's not going to get progressively worse like we think of an anterolisthesis, a forward slippage of the vertebra. But it is something that we can notice. And this is another reason why the towel is so particularly helpful, because it really does support that natural backward bending curve in a much more healthy way. And then we think about this individual where we've got a flattened lumbar spine. We've got a degree of retrolisthesis over here where it's shearing backwards at the L5-S1. This is definitely flatter. And we don't give them extra knee hugs, extra child's pose, because we didn't know any of this. And this is the real limitation around flexion extension based exercises, because you might be forgiven for seeing that set of x-rays and going, oh, well, the person's got too flat a lumbar spine, we should give them the Cobra. The problem with the Cobra is that it, again, is just going to pull backwards. And often in this sort of scenario, it does not feel good. We end up straining that L5-S1 retrolisthesis even more, because the person's spine is not bending in its appropriate normal way, because they've got muscle spasm, they've got soreness, they've got instability at certain joints, they've got retrolisthesis, which by definition is an instability, right? And they've got some elements of disc damage as well at that same level. Doing bendy, twisty exercises might well have some place if you have a very clear understanding of exactly how much bending you are putting into the joint and the necessity for that. For example, if you could very clearly see the person was stuck in a position of flexion or extension, we could make the case for them doing that extension-based exercises. But the question is, can you in the lumbar spine make sure that L5-S1 does not move and that the other segments do? No, you can't. You can't control and say, right, well, we can see on the x-rays, right, that L5-S1, if we go through the individual segmental angles, let's just do that very briefly. We come back over to the x-rays, right? We can see that down at the bottom, L5-S1 is actually 26. It should be 33. It's 26 of backward bending. But L4-5 is 5. L3-4 is 4, 1, and 1. So maybe if we got this lot to increase its curvature a little bit more, that would be helpful. Well, yes, but we also have to consider the fact that the pelvis is in a state of posterior pelvic tuck, right? It's in a state of posterior pelvic tuck. And we can see that by the fact that if I remove the measures over here, the hips, look at the hips in respect to the center of the spine. If we compare this to the normal over here, look at the hips in respect to the center of the spine. This is vertically aligned. This is a permanent pelvic tuck where they are not vertically aligned. To show you guys what I'm talking about, right? If you guys try right now to do a posterior pelvic tilt and like an extreme one and hold it, your hips go forwards and your spine flattens, right? That's the way it is. And now we're tense all through here because this is not an efficient or relaxed position. Now we're like that all the time. Then we get told by a well-meaning individual that your legs are tight, your hamstrings are tight, your glutes are tight. Well, of course they are. You're standing in a very inefficient position. Now, some of these concepts require a little bit more discussion and a little bit more clarification. And it is a little bit more difficult to go through that on a live session like this. So I will hope that I do a good job. And you guys can also always comment in the comment section down below, because this next bit is a little bit complicated. But I thought it's worth it for some of you guys. In last week's x-rays, we saw that Ella's relationship between her sacrum, which is the triangle bone here, and the hips, was such that it indicated that she needed a little bit more curve than the average person. I think it was somewhere in the region of about 46, and her sacral base should be around about 46. And you see that she's not that far off those numbers. She's 52, she should have been 46. She's 46, she should be 46, so that's great. But in this particular case here, we have the exact opposite issue. The relationship between the sacrum and the hips, this is the way in which the person has developed, means that this individual, if they did a little bit of anterior pelvic tilt, they don't need as much slope to their sacrum. They don't need as much curve in the lumbar spine. It just so happens that it's 27. I put it up here for reference. So if this person should have a natural lumbar curve, ideally of around 27, being at 13 is still not that great, but it's not as bad as it maybe looked on the surface, considering it should be 40 under normal circumstances. And so a little bit of improvement in the curve here would go a long way. That's where things like the towel come in. But we have to also acknowledge that there are some differences from one individual to the next. And so hopefully that's, those of you guys watching this where it's relevant to you specifically, you can always post in the members area, etc., on the website. And I can go through this in a little bit more detail. But understanding that there are some morphological differences from one individual to the next, meaning that some of us just need a little bit less lumbar curve. In this case, this is case in point. But even if we need a little bit less lumbar curve, a 27-degree curve through the lumbar spine, if we're down at 13, we want to try and increase that, right? That is going to be relevant. We certainly need to acknowledge that even in the scenario where we only need 27 degrees of curve in the lower back, if we have 13, we are still stuck in a position of forward bending. And so extra forward bending work is not going to be advisable. And this kind of transitions nicely. And then I'm going to come to some of the questions that have been coming through on TikTok and on YouTube, etc., and try and cover all those. When you're relying on stretchy bendy stuff as your quote unquote solution, this is not something we do. You can see how seeing this stuff is really important, right? Because if you're saying, oh, you just need to bend more, just bend more, bend more, bend more, and most of your bending is forward bending, you could make the case that actually we need to do more bending, we need to improve the mobility, but now we know that you are stuck in forward bending, we want to focus on all the other things that aren't forward bending because you're already stuck there, right? But when we consider the fact that these things can happen, and the vast majority of you guys don't have imaging, but we know that they can be there. This is one of the reasons why we lean so much into stability, because there's not anything that can come back on the X-ray, on the MRI, etc., when you have an injury that doesn't mean that you will not benefit from stabilizing this lumbar spine. In this case, we've got a significant reduction in the lumbar curve. It's flatter than otherwise should be. Does that mean this person can benefit from controlling and stabilizing their spine more? Yes. Is it going to be a good idea that they learn to control this area more? Yes. Is it going to be a good idea they learn to build up strength and support for this area over the long term? Yes. At some point down the line, could they look into ways in which they can actually change that curvature? Yes. But stability, not moving and bending and twisting things, providing that safe starting point is of vital import. I think that's where things go so wrong for so many others when they're talking about doing bending and twisting one way or another. Stability is safe in all of these scenarios. And I would challenge any of you guys watching this, name a scenario or an injury that you guys think, a cause of lower back issues, that will not benefit from improving the ability to stabilize and control the lumbar spine. I will wait, because it's very difficult. I have tried to make the case that that's not appropriate. But now try and make the case that it's not appropriate to do forward bending, to do backward bending, to do twisting. Yes, you can. This would be such an example, right? The backward bending can be a problem because of the retrolisthesis. The forward bending can be a problem because we are stuck in forward bending. Why do we need those exercises? How are they contributing to the recovery process? The answer is they're not. They might well provide some element of moment-to-moment relief, but they're not contributing to the recovery process. And if they're taking away from actually providing stability to this section of the lower back, they are not just a distraction, but they're a disadvantage. So if there's any other questions that come up with regards to the x-rays, please do ask. But I'm going to come in and jump through some of these questions, some of these comments in here. And I will also do a little public service announcement for all of you guys that are members of the program. There was a big update to some of the infrastructure that happened over the last 12 hours or so. I had a little check just before I came on to the live today, and it looks like everything is up and running. We're still running some checks in the background during the live on the website, etc. But it looks like the members area is all back up and running now, which is great. Apologies for that short period of time during which the site has been under maintenance, but it should all be good now. Fingers crossed. So Paulina says, hi, Mike, is adding more hip internal rotation to exercises dangerous? Saw an example of a Bulgarian split squat tutorial where you twist your hips towards the working leg, more of a glute stretch. Is that safe? I don't see that's an issue if you're further on in the recovery side of things. Paulina, I don't believe that should be a problem. We're talking more about in that particular scenario when you've got your leg out in front of you. I assume we're talking about kind of pivoting in that direction. That would be a movement of your hip joint rather than your spine. And so I don't see that being a problem as a technical tweak on the exercise, not at all. Minlab says, I posted the x-rays on the Facebook group. Not sure if it's been possible to discuss. Minlab, I have briefly seen those, but I want to look at them properly. So I won't be able to talk through them on today's live session, but we'll have a look at them and hopefully go through them next session. What else we got here? Because I find so some questions here. Hello, you've helped me a lot with my lower back pain. Is the same true for sciatica? Not sure what we're referencing here. This is Topot's fan. Is it now rarely hurts, but I have sciatica some days. I know you've said stretching doesn't work for back pain. It causes relief. I find stretching makes the sciatica worse in the moment, but feels like it will make it better over time. No, understand very clearly about sciatica. Those of you struggling with sciatica specifically, sciatica is just a back problem with symptoms in the leg. So everything that we talk about for the lower back issue, build stability, build strength in the lumbar spine. The most important question in these sorts of scenarios is, where are you up to on your squat and hip hinge? What kind of load are we doing on our squat and hip hinge? Topot's fan. What are we up to in those domains? That's really a very important point of context, right? If we're up at 40, 50, 60 kilos and beyond, then we can have a conversation, which is a very different conversation to if we're still messing around with 3, 5, 10, 15 kilos weights, right? It's very normal when you guys come into the rehabilitation process, whether it's with us or whether it's anywhere else, right? When you start the rehabilitation process for your lower back injury, you are normally motivated to start because you have pain. You don't wake up one morning with no pain whatsoever and think, do you know what, I'm going to start doing a back rehab program. That's unfortunately, as much as I wish that was the case, it's not the case. And so most of you guys join the program or start your rehab while you are in pain. And so during that process of learning, of starting to make some progress in the rehab, it's very normal to still be experiencing moment to moment, day to day aggravations because you haven't you haven't done the job, right? I use the example of like a leak in the roof above me all the time, right? If the guys have just put up the scaffolding right outside to get onto the roof, it's very likely I'm still going to have water coming on my head if it rains. That doesn't mean the process isn't working. It just means that we haven't made enough progress through the job to get rid of all the symptoms. And they might have then put some stuff up, etc., made some progress so it's not leaking as much. But until they finish the job, we still have to continue going through the process, and we might still have some flare-ups, some leaks along the way. Looking through some of these. What is going on with constant lower backache? I have progressed from bodyweight squats, now 35 kilo squats, still constantly hurting and unstable. Having a look at other things that are going on there, Sam. I'm not sure if you're still in the program or not, but having a look at the other factors that are there in your daily life, etc., is really quite important. 35 kilos is a good level, but it's not quite far enough. I would suggest we still need to make a little bit more progress in that front. But one of the things that is often not addressed, and this is a flaw of many, and that is that we end up going, oh, well, the exercises feel like they're doing something, so I'll keep doing the exercises, and we don't do the care of self stuff, we don't do the relief stuff, we don't do the actual the relief work. The relief work is valuable, right? Doing the lower body stretching, doing the towel decompression, doing the contrast bathing along the way, like those things are valuable tools. They are valuable tools. I don't want to say that they're not. The focus is the rehab, but that doesn't mean we get rid of the valuable tools as well, right? We don't get rid of the relief work. We do still continue to do that. And as people start to make more progress on the rehab front, for example, up to 35 kilos on the kettlebell squats in this particular case, we often find a couple of things, right? Number one, we could start getting out and doing other things, other extracurricular activities, right? That's a factor to consider. Have we done that in the best possible way? But also people often have less motivating factors to continue the relief work. They don't bother doing the towel stretch quite as much. They don't do the lower body stretching quite as much. And then things start to become a bit more of a problem. So we have to be consistent with all aspects and also look at our daily life. It's so important. Joshua said, laying on your stomach for too long, is it bad on a yoga mat to stretch or lay straight? I'm not too sure about that question, but I don't think you can lie on your stomach for too long unless you're getting uncomfortable. And if you are, move. Oscar said, should I add lat pull down on a hip hinge day and chest press on a squat day. To be honest, Oscar, you're getting back into things from the holiday, the trip, in the early part of this year. I keep your back workouts as back workouts. I'd be doing the structured workouts in phase 4. And then I would have a separate day where you do upper body, just like we do in the additional workouts. Use one of the upper body workouts, additional workout 1 or additional workout 2, to do your upper body stuff on that separate day. That's the better way of doing it. Minlab, all right, thank you. I've been using a kettlebell bags with rocks to get 25 kilos for squats and hip hinges, but it's too bulky now. I've added a backpack with rocks until I can get a weighted vest, but it's quite uncomfortable. Yeah, you got to get the weighted vest and get the workout gear. That's an awesome use of the it's an awesome use of the of creativity. But at some point, Katie, we just want to get some equipment, some proper gym based equipment, especially if we're working out at home. Invest in the weights, invest in the weighted vest. These kind of things are very, very durable. Like, you buy them once and you're going to have them really for life. Topots says, I'm hip hinging and squats 30 or 40 kilos, but it makes sciatica worse. Then we are doing something incorrectly. And that's very important. Definitely get into the members area, Topots fam. Give us an update of what you can do aggravation free on the squats or hip hinges. One of the most important principles, guys, in the program is aggravation free with correct choreography. When you are doing your exercises, aggravation free with correct choreography. We do not want to be having flare-ups. At some points, you will find that although your technique is good, your spine just cannot bear loading. It cannot bear that extra bit of load. That's important. Now, there are depending on the specific exercise, there are things we can do to get around that. But we have to acknowledge there are 2 main areas that we are working with in our rehabilitation. Area number 1 is going to be the muscles. Your muscles are getting stronger as a result of working out, particularly in what we call phase 3. And this is important to provide stability for the lower back, strengthen up this area so that it can protect it more. But the second area is the actual spine itself, the load-bearing capacity of the spine in those injured segments in the lower back. Those are getting stronger also. But we have to remember that these tissues in here in the spine, they change and adapt to strain in matters of months, whereas your muscles will change in matters of weeks. And so for some individuals for all individuals sooner or later, but for some individuals sooner, you start to notice that although you can kind of manage it, it's getting a little bit aggravating because of the loading. And therefore we talk about this in the members area in the program. Some of you will need to more consciously factor in artificial plateaus where you go, do you know what? I'm strong enough. My legs are loving it. I'm able to go up the weight, but actually I'm just going to sit here at this weight for a touch longer and allow my body to adapt to the stress and strain. Just going over to TikTok. If anyone is suffering and hasn't got deep tissue massage, go and get one. Also get in the gym. One of the important things with that, some people find that deep tissue massage is not appropriate for them. It's too much. It creates too much of an aggravation, too much of an issue. And just getting in the gym is also not strategic advice. One of the most important things, if we have an injury, go and do a rehabilitation, right? If you guys have a shoulder issue, if you've got a knee issue, if you've got an ankle issue, go and do rehabilitation for that specific issue, right? If that's a specific program or protocol you want to follow, go and do that, right? We don't have a knee program or any of that kind of stuff. We have a back program. If you have an injury, do a program that is focused around a number of pillars or principles, if you will, to build and rehabilitate that particular area of the body, to improve the health of that body. And I would argue that the principles of those kind of things should be applicable to the healthy individual as well as the injured individual in some way, shape, or form. For example, I would say the best time for any of you guys to have joined the program would be before you injured your back, as a great example. Don't just go to the gym and do random stuff. That is a recipe for, at least it's a high risk recipe, let's say. And so as much as we want to, it's great to be proactive, do something that has a bit more of a structure, right? It's really important that we've got some element of structure. Because also you have to remember that when you're doing your rehabilitation, when you're doing your exercises, you don't know if it was some freak accident, if it was an issue with how you pick the weight up, independent of the actual exercise. So for example, if you go and do your squats one day and you're going to pick up, and say you're doing a low hold kettlebell squat, right? And you got the weight here, it's on the floor, and you go and pick it up like this, and then you go and do your squats like this, and then you put it down like this again. That's nothing to do with the squat. That's the fact that you were undisciplined in your approach to the squat. And when you picked up the weight at the start, you picked it up with a rounded lower back, which put strain on that particular section of the lower back that's injured and aggravated you. And so if you're just doing random stuff in the gym, it's very difficult to fault find, to trouble find. to troubleshoot, sorry. And that makes reflection on whether you did something right or did something wrong really, really difficult. You want to try, or at least this is the best way we found of dealing with these things, is with lower back issues, especially with lower back issues, you live with your lower back every single day. And so there are a huge number of confounding variables that your spine is exposed to, that John's spine is not exposed to, that Sarah's spine is not exposed to, etc., etc. And so there's all of those variables. If we have a workout protocol that controls as many of those variables as possible and removes as much of the confounding data as possible, we can at least have some mechanism for trying to sort, the wheat from the chaff, or whatever the phrase is, right? And that gives us some kind of pathway with a degree of objectivity that we can follow to get out of this hole, so to speak. What else have we got? I'm in a lot of disc bulge pain. And doing the first exercises, the tummy tuck one, is that okay? I assume we mean we're doing the core engagement drill, Yaz. Yes, learning to engage the core is vital. A lot of people with lower back issues, especially ladies that have had pregnancies or C-sections, struggle to actually engage the core. They also struggle to engage a specific area of the core particularly well, and that's the area between the belly button and the pubic bone. And that is the area that happens to be adjacent to the lower section of the lumbar spine. They struggle a little bit more with that. That's not to say they can't do it, but it's to say they struggle to get that control to start with. Now, that's an issue that can explain why you struggle a little more with getting better with your specific lower back, and that's fine. Acknowledge it though, and that's something that you're going to take a little bit longer to deal with. But you'll get there, right? As Zoe said, I had a microdiscectomy at L5-S1 last year. Is leg cramping normal in the affected leg? It might well be let me rephrase that. If you have had a microdiscectomy and have not done the appropriate rehabilitation, then it's not unreasonable to suggest that we might still have some residual symptoms. If you guys have had surgery, especially relatively recently, it's always best to reach back out to the surgical team and say, hey guys, I had the surgery with you guys. We did this microdiscectomy at L5-S1, but I'm still experiencing some symptoms, or I'm experiencing this, that, the other. Symptoms going down into the leg would very plausibly be associated with the same area of the spine that has been injured, L5-S1 specifically in this case, and operated on. So that if we came out with symptoms in the arm, then we can very reasonably say that's nothing to do with the surgery, right? But it's very important that we understand, well, we may have had buttock pain and back pain before, and then we had the surgery, and now we've got sciatic type symptoms down the leg, cramping, etc. That could still be related to the same area of the lower back that had been operated on. So hopefully that makes sense. Damon said, I had surgery on my L5-S1 in 2022. Haven't had any real issues, but it gets very sore. And that's probably, Damon, having a think about, have we done the appropriate rehabilitation work? Have we built strength and resilience back into the spine? And often the answer to that is no. And if the answer is yes, then we have a number that we can talk about, right? We can say, well, actually, yeah, I've rebuilt my strength and stability in my spine, as is demonstrable by my squat, by my hip hinge, which has gone from, 5 kilos 3 months after surgery to now I'm able to squat, 50, 60, 70 kilos, 10 reps without any aggravation of my symptoms. That's what we're looking to have to be able to demonstrate that we have done an appropriate rehabilitation process, right? This is the really important differentiation, right? With what we're talking about versus what a lot of you guys have seen elsewhere. A lot of the stretchy, bendy, twisty stuff has no real markers to it. How do I know I'm improved? Well, I feel a bit better. Yeah, but there's lots of chances. Your body is trying to heal every single day. So you'll feel better because the body is working, right? It's doing its thing. It's going through a healing process. But that's not the same as actually rebuilding resilience, doing the appropriate rehabilitation work to rehabilitate the ability of the spine to load bear effectively and be resilient to the things that you want it to do every day, right? For example, your cardiovascular system might well need a little bit of rehabilitation, because if you've been terribly inactive, you might find that running for the bus gets you significantly out of breath. Is that appropriate for a human being who has to run for the bus 20 meters or 20 seconds to be terribly out of breath? Probably not. Probably not. Probably we need to do some work to rehabilitate our cardiovascular system. It's the same thing for the lower back. Trying to have some element of objective measures of load tolerance makes the lower back in that regard very, very easy to measure the success of your rehab. Because the one fundamental thing that this thing does is it bears load. That's its role. It bears load and has to move and bend and twist in all directions, right? But it bears load. And if we start with that in the safest possible position, then we can at least have some kind of idea what our current status quo is in the lower back. What else have we got here? Damon says, rehab wasn't great at all. How can I strengthen it? I'm more into the gym now. Exactly what we talk about, Damon. The squat and the hip hinge are the two fundamental ones that we use in the program. And if you need a little bit more guidance, check it out. There's a link in the profile page over on TikTok, guys. But using the squat and the hip hinge, a little bit of guidance for those of you guys that are doing actually the right stuff. Right? People often ask, oh, Mike, why don't you use sets of 5, for example? Like 5 by 5 is a traditional strengthening approach, effective strengthening to make improvements to strength, right? 5 sets of 5 reps. And what we found is that while that might be a little bit more effective, when you fail at 5 reps, or when you're pushing yourself and you're targeting 5 reps, it might be that you only get 2 or 3. Whereas when we fail or are targeting 10 reps, we might get down to 8 or 9 and then we stop. The way you tend to fail at 8 or 9 reps versus the way you tend to fail at 2 or 3 reps, I think generally is very different. And so sticking at the 10 rep ranges and not being tempted to go down to 3, 4, and 5 rep ranges in your strengthening, I think is a smart move. While it might be slightly less efficient, you can still build strength working at 10 reps. You can still build strength working at 10 reps. And if it is slightly less efficient, that's actually perhaps an advantage rather than a disadvantage, because your spine, the structures in your spine that are load bearing and adapting to the load bearing, such as in Damon's squat after he's had the surgery, or maybe in Cole's case where he's had a microdiscectomy, in these sorts of scenarios, the muscles getting too strong too fast can lead you into this sensation that you are actually a lot better than you are. And sometimes that can trip people up. So one of the groups that get caught out are those of you that have trained in the past and that like training, right? You've been struggling with your lower back for a long period of time. Maybe we've had a microdiscectomy. Maybe we've just had a really bad bout of a herniated disc and we've had a terrible, terrible flare-ups. And we're back in the gym, we're making some progress. And then we're like, yes, I'm training. Then we push the load too hard because we're feeling great. And then we have a relapse at 50 kilos, right? Because we've forgotten that the spine is changing a little bit more slowly. The tissues in here, they adapt in matters of months. The muscles that support it, the muscles of your legs, they adapt in matters of weeks. On top of that, if you have a background in training, muscle memory is a real thing. And so you will bring back up that strength a lot quicker in the muscles. And it doesn't necessarily respect the fact that the spinal joints need a little bit longer to recover and go through that adaptation process. Cole has said he's had the microdiscectomy 5 days ago and is feeling a lot better. That's awesome. Make sure you get on with your rehabilitation work. That really makes the world of difference in terms of building on what's already been done. Damon said, I get sharp pain where my scar is during RDLs. Very interesting there. What's probably happening in that scenario is that we are allowing a bit of bending to occur in the lumbar spine, especially if we're noticing it in the bottom part of the repetition. Taking a step back and reapproaching that with a little bit more care of form is really quite important. What else have we got here? Just looking through some more of the questions and comments. L5-S1 disc bulging, MRI shows spinal stenosis. Any advice? One of the important things when you guys have the imaging on your spine is to understand that if you have a disc bulge or herniation like this, stenosis is more or less a guaranteed thing, right? It's bulging into this space. Stenosis is just a comment of narrowing of this hole. And well, if the disc is bulged there, then of course the hole is going to be narrowed. Sometimes people get confused and think it's a different thing. You focus on the disc injury, right? The disc injury is the problem in this scenario. It's not the fact that it's bulged, or it's not the bulge itself, although the bulge itself can create issues, right? Especially if it's hitting the nerve. The disc bulge is a failure of the annulus fibrosis and likely other ligaments that run between these vertebral segments to do its job. That's how it's failed. And so it is those tissues that need to go through a healing and re-strengthening process. And often we start to focus more on the symptoms, the fact that this disc bulge is hitting a nerve in some cases. Not as common as you might think. or the fact that we have stenosis. If we think the problem is that it's hitting a nerve, the natural next step is that, well, we should take pressure off the nerve. Well, how might we do that? We bend forwards. If we think the problem is stenosis, well, how might we enlarge this space? We bend forwards, right? You can see how you can get trapped into this cycle of doing things that involve you bending forwards if you're prioritizing the wrong thing. Just by taking that sentence that Taseka has said, my L5 disc is bulging and the MRI shows spinal stenosis. If we don't focus on the right part, the actual root injury, and focus on some of the other details, then we end up doing stuff that flexes the lumbar spine, that makes the underlying problem worse. If, however, we focus on the fact that we have a spinal injury, focus on stabilizing the spine, then we can start moving forwards in the right direction. Jim has said, I'm sick of babying my back. I just trained how I used to now. It's not about babying your back. It's about creating an appropriate rehabilitation process. And because a lot of you guys haven't done that, you might well feel like you're babying your back. If your back is injured, it's injured, right? You can't just game it, right? There's no kind of ignoring it or anything like that. You do need to go through the appropriate rehabilitation process. If you do that, then you'll rebuild a strong back. And as we mentioned many times before, there's every chance that those of you guys with an injured lower back will be stronger than you have been before you injured your lower back if you do the right rehabilitation work. If you do your rehab properly, there is every chance that you will be stronger and more resilient after recovering from the back injury than you were beforehand. Kishmari says, lower back pain with movement, but better while resting. I can't stand for too long. This is very, very common, right? You've injured, if we go back to the x-rays from earlier, right? We've got a retrolisthesis down here. This section on the MRI, on the x-ray, sorry, right? This vertebra at the bottom on the x-ray is shearing backwards. By definition, now the good news is there's a nice big disc space there in spite of this, okay? This is instability. This is instability. When you guys have flare-ups, it's because you moved in one direction or another. Again, going back to, should you be doing bendy, twisty exercises and stretching? No. You need to learn to provide stability. Kiss Marie needs to learn to provide stability. We do exercises like the dead bug, the marching bridge, the squat, the hip hinge, the step up, the single leg hip hinge. These exercises teach you how to provide stability in the real world and are extremely accessible to all of you guys. They're teaching you how to control your spine, because it is when you moved in one direction or another that created the flare-up. It is the load on the spine from being upright and putting load through that spine that creates the aggravations. You're just not able to tolerate it yet. But if you go through the rehab process, you rebuild that control, you rebuild that support in the lower back, right? Kiss has come up and said again, even when I sit for too long, it's worse. Lying down seems, yes, because when you lie down, you have less load on the lumbar spine. Right? You have less load on the lumbar spine. What we're basically saying is, when I strain my lower back, it's like saying I've got this sore on my cheek, and when I press it, it hurts. Well, what's the first thing you say to that? Stop pressing it, right? Well, that's easy to do with the sore on my face. It's not easy to do with the lower back, right? But understanding that it's perfectly reasonable that you might be struggling with sitting and standing, and that lying down would feel better in most cases. Why? Because you've got an injury in your lower back. And so it's almost like saying, oh, well, I've got a sprained ankle on my left ankle, and when I hop on my left ankle, it hurts. Okay, stop hopping on your left ankle. Lean on the right one and use something to take pressure off the left one. It's injured. It needs to recover. For some reason, you know, that honest discussion is not had. Now, that doesn't solve the problem, but if you guys understand that it is a spinal disc related issue in the lower back, you start to understand that things that increase the loading on my lumbar spine are going to test me. I'm going to find them uncomfortable. And then it's not this strange occurrence that freaks you guys out, right? A lot of times, because you don't understand these things, because you're not taught, and who is, right? I don't understand when the car doesn't work, right? And then I get freaked out, and then I call whoever it is, and I'm like, hey, can you please help me, right? Because I don't know what's going on. It's completely normal for you guys not to know, because it's not your area of expertise. But this is one of the reasons why we put so much effort into education, because as painful as it can be, at least understanding why it's painful in those areas can at least help you feel a little bit more confident that there's nothing wrong up here, right? Although you might be feeling demotivated, deflated, etc. It's not something wrong with you. It's that your back actually has an injury, and the back is supposed to do these things. And when it's injured, it's going to struggle doing those things. And so rehab needs to support your back while it's going through the recovery process. And you need to do the recovery process. You need to do the rehabilitation process to help it go through that. What else we got? I still have pain on my lower back and sides when I'm walking and standing up. Why? Same sort of stuff as we were just talking about. Lee, I get lower back ache and discomfort just when I stand up for a short period of time. What could it be? Again, exactly the same sort of thing. Guys, if you have a lower back injury, it's going to be uncomfortable when you are doing things that strain that lower back. Now, there are additional factors at play here, right? So, for example, we saw on the x-rays earlier on in this particular case, okay? When we're standing up here, the spine is still bent forwards. It's still bent forwards significantly so. The spine is still stuck in a forward bending position. Even when this person is stood up straight, their spine is not curved like it should be. It doesn't have a smooth curve going through it, right? We see that. And sometimes that is the case, right? Susie and Pepe have both had microdiscectomies. So I have microdiscectomy a year ago. The left leg is still very numb. The biggest thing, Susie, is what rehab did you do? What did you get up onto? What did you get up to doing on your squats and hip hinges? Or did you just do some bendy, twisty exercises and some stretches? Jamo said he had spinal fusion, or she, I don't know, he had spinal fusion, L5-S1. Those of you guys that have had any kind of surgical fusions, the focus on spine stability is even more important, because if you just do generic bending, twisting exercises, going back to the x-rays, right? If I just come back up to these, there we go, right? When you move your spine, we have all of these joints on the side here, okay? We have all of these joints. We've got one joint here, one joint here, one joint here, one joint here, one joint. And we got these here. This is the normal. When you move and bend, all the person is seeing, and I don't even think you can fully appreciate it, the person's back is here. That's their skin, roughly there. Okay? So if you come back to me, when your practitioner is looking at you and you're doing this and that, they have no clue how much anything is moving or not moving, which areas might be hinging too much, which areas aren't. With all other peripheral joints, we want to be aware of how much we're moving so we can focus our rehabilitation work and make sure that we're not making mistakes and problems. We're interested in how we're moving through the range. The problem with the lower back is you're missing that information. And we need to focus instead on providing stability. This is one of the reasons we need to do that, also the way in which the lumbar spine functions, right? We need to focus on providing stability to the lower back. That is where the results lie, because we don't know how much it's bending. And if we've had a fusion of L5-S1 down here, less joints are going to be doing the same surface amount of movement. So you don't know if this person with an L5-S1 fusion starts doing this, if they're engendering a degree of hypermobility into L4-5, let's say. And this is why we talk about this quite often, right? To the degree you have an abnormality in your spine, a structural change in your spine, a fusion in your spine, a spondylolisthesis in your spine, a retrolisthesis in your spine, some of those kind of things, right? The ones that feel a bit more objectively bad or significant. It's more important that you focus on spine stability first and strength first, because by doing that, you're going to be doing exercises like a squat and a hip hinge, etc. So we know that you will be building strength in the hips as well. And then once you've done that and reached a good degree of spinal load tolerance, you can also start and need to start working on your hip mobility. Your hip mobility for the long term helps with the scenario whereby you need to move the back in some way, shape, or form, right? But if your hips are more mobile, they will be able to move through a greater range of motion before your lower back has to get involved. And when your lower back gets involved, your lower back will have to do less, right? The lower back has less need to do all the way over like that because the hips got it to there and the back just needed to do that extra little bit. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. If it's not clear, let me know in the comments, guys. Carolyn says, where can I get the block I saw with you last week? Carolyn, are you talking about this thing? Let me know. I'll keep an eye on the comments. What else? Can you tell me what an L5-S1 disc desiccation is exactly? Had herniated disc 8 years ago. Please take magnesium glycinate. It's almost gone first time. With just going off topic. Sorry, I fell. Magnesium glycinate is awesome, right? I take magnesium glycinate I don't think that has anything to do with herniated discs, I would argue. Jessa says, after rehab work, shoulder blade, I've had microdiscectomy, feeling great, but I don't know what to do other than walking suggestions. Pepe, often you guys have the surgery and you're not given anything like the appropriate support afterwards, and that's a real problem. And Cole has just commented in here and said, what's the biggest thing you'd recommend to accelerate recovery after microdiscectomy? I would strongly suggest, if you've had a lower back injury and you're looking for the best thing to do to help you rehabilitate afterwards, whether you've had the back surgery or whether you just got an injury to the lower back, I would strongly recommend checking out the program, right? There's a link in the profile page. I would strongly recommend checking that out, because that gives you education, it gives you the exercises, it gives you the routines, it gives you the tutorials, it gives you the support, it gives you all of that stuff, a proper protocol, if you will, that is specifically designed to help you guys recover effectively, whether you've had back surgery or not. But the exercises you're doing there are focused on learning to provide stability. The great thing about those exercises as well is you're already doing them every day, right? So if Pepe has his back surgery and he gets out and he goes out into the real world, Cole maybe has the same sort of thing, right? He's had a microdiscectomy, goes out in the real world, gets sent home. We've done this a couple of times on the live, right? We've asked you guys, what did you get? Did you get sent home after you had your back surgery? Did you drive home? Did you have to be driven home, right? Were you sat in the car? Did you get out of the car? Like all of these things, the answer is yes, 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 yes. Did you get dressed yourself this morning, right? If you did, then starting to do spine stability is going to be helpful, right? Because you're already doing things that are significantly more strenuous than the exercises that we talk about in the program every single day. The only difference is with all those things that you're doing, you're not given any guidance or anything like that. Cola says, I've seen you on here multiple times and I got to thank you. You're always here helping people. I appreciate that. Thank you for the support. It's very much appreciated. And yeah, guys, we do that. We've been doing the lives 2-3 times a week. And hopefully it is helpful. And we really appreciate all of you guys that are posting, coming on here live, sharing, commenting, etc. It really is appreciated. Carolyn has just come on and said the one that you held up, the Denerol, you can't very easily get those specifically in the online. But I was speaking to one of the members, and they had one that they'd got from the US from a new brand, which is exactly the same thing. To be honest, it looks a bit like a knockoff, but it looked good nonetheless, which is all that matters really. And I don't have the name of it to hand. So please do a post, Carolyn, in the members area just about this, and I'll try and dig out the link later today to get that across to you, because you can buy them online. They're about like $25, something like that. Depending on where you are, you're gonna have to pay for shipping, but yeah, I think it's a US-based company. What else have we got here? Pepe said, no, they didn't tell me anything, just rest, walk, and a bit more recovery every day. Another visit on 20th. Like, man, like it's absolutely mind-boggling that you guys will be this is not a critique at all of you as the individual, as the patient, but like you're going and have surgery and the advice is like, oh, we're going to do this really meticulous surgery. We've got robots and we've got this and we're going to go into a tiny hole and we're going to like, it's so cool, right? It's so cool, modern innovation and all that kind of stuff. It's so cool. And then it's like, yeah, just go home and walk a bit. Like that's where how you've left the interaction. It's so like, what's the word, maybe antithetical or chalk and cheese. It's so polar opposite. It's absolutely terrible, to send Pepe home and many others with just no advice whatsoever, no guidance, right? No guidance. It's really quite poor. Yes, your body is trying to heal every single day, but if you've had a microdiscectomy, like the important thing to understand is what the problem actually is, right? When you have a disc injury, the problem is not that the disc is hitting the nerve. That's the problem that might be motivating you to get the surgery, but that is not the problem. The problem is that the disc material in the middle has broken through these layers and that the annulus fibrosis has been damaged. It is no longer functioning effectively. It is injured. It needs to heal, right? For example, if your bicep tendon snapped and your bicep rolled up here, you might be like, oh, my bicep muscle is all the way up here. That's a problem. That's not the problem, though. The problem was that the tendon snapped down here. That's the problem, right? So the problem is that the annulus is injured. And so you need to be given rehabilitation support and guidance to support the recovery process that's going to take place after they've removed that bit of disc. Yes, that is a problem. If it's hitting certain groups of nerves like the cauda, it's a serious problem. We need to remove it in certain cases. Thankfully, the number of cases that you need to have surgical intervention for back injuries and herniated discs is extremely small. So the vast majority of you don't need to. But the important thing to understand, whether you had surgery or not, is that the disc bulge or herniation was not the injury, right? The injury was the damage to the annulus fibrosis that led to the disc bulge. And so that's what you need to rehabilitate afterwards. And you need guidance and support to actually start building up strength and stability. And Buzz has said in here, and it's unfortunate to see this. Can I do gentle? Oh, okay, not as bad as I thought it was. Can I do gentle cat cows at the end of my stabilizing exercise? No, no. This area is trying to stiffen back up. It's trying to restore stability. You going and bending and twisting to get it moving again is not what you need to do. It's not the right thing to do. We don't need to bend and twist. We want it to tighten back up. For example, right? If you've got a cut on your elbow, okay, you will see that the two sides of the wound are trying to knit back together again. You will feel during the recovery process of that scar, that scab trying to heal, you will feel when you bend your elbow, it pulls a little bit, right? Do you need to just stretch and pull it apart? No, because that rips it apart again. And then it starts bleeding all over the place. When you are in a recovery process, it's very normal to feel some elements of tension in the lower back. But you don't need to do cat-cow, child's pose, etc. Learning to get off that, because some of you guys are not addicted to it, but you kind of use them over and over again. And it's perpetuating the problem. Is really important. And, you know, make no mistake, I'll come back to the x-rays again, right? In this scenario here, it's not uncommon at all for someone with a spine like this that is stuck forward bending. It's stuck in forward bending, right? This is straight. It should have a curve to it. It's reduced by, in this particular case with the adjustments, 67 from normal, but about 50% reduction from a modified figure. This person will probably find doing child's pose and cat-cows will feel pleasant in a lot of cases because it's opening out the spaces even more. But it is a problem that you're getting hooked and you're making the problem worse. Leave it out. There are other things that we can do to help with the feelings of stiffness and tension. Often, it's actually something like the towel to take pressure off those muscles. In the example that we've just seen there, this is hopefully will help you guys see it very clearly. When we have an appropriate curve, if this is the muscles, they're kind of like the bowstring, I suppose. When we have an appropriate curve, we're like so. The muscles run from A to B. You can see the distance there. When we flatten out the curve by 50%, the muscles now have to run from A to C, longer. So the muscles are constantly in this scenario being held in a position of stretch. And so you will feel that as a feeling of stiffness, a feeling of tension. Why? Because you're constantly holding the stretch. When you do a stretch, you feel tension in your hamstrings, but they are being stretched. And you can, the problem that people make with the lower back is they conflate the feeling of tension with a tension that needs stretching rather than a tension that needs to be taken off tension or taken off stretch. And so that's another reason why the towel is so good, right? We place the towel underneath the lower back and it takes and supports the spine with a little bit of lordosis protection. And it creates a little bit of decompression, axial elongation at the level of the spine. So often people misinterpret the feelings of tension in the lower back with a tension that needs to be stretched, or they infer that the tension feeling in their lower back is something that needs to be stretched as opposed to something that needs to be taken off stretch. What else have we got here? Lady Magdalena has said, are you in the UK? Yes, we are. I'm walking, waiting for a nerve blocker again. Constant pain in both my bum cheeks. We've got to do something, Joe, to deal with the problem, right? Rehabilitation work. Someone that really loves latte has been doing the core 5 for 3 days, 3 times a week. When you start doing those kind of exercises, when you start doing the dead bugs, marching bridges, squats, hip hinges, step ups, those kind of things, right? You will often do them daily because you need to learn how to do them safely. But when you are further on in the recovery process, you do them less frequently. The important question here is, what kind of load are we doing, right? What kind of load are we doing, and how are we recovering from that session? A lot of times you're doing body weight only at the start, or should be anyway, and so you can do that every day. But there is the things change. This is why you need a program, not just a random exercises, because the program, as you go through the different phases of the program, you have different. You're doing things in slightly different ways, with slightly different loads, at slightly different intensities, and then that feeds into the need for things like rest days, active recovery days, shifts in focus, etc. It's not just about randomly doing some exercises or movements. And that's all too often, that's what people's rehab actually is. It's just random stuff. Holly says, as well as doing the core 5, what upper body movements would you recommend to support the lower back? I'd stick at just those for the time being. Holly, it depends on where you're at in the recovery process in terms of rehab and strength, etc. And thank you for the kind words. Appreciate that. But like typically, like, unless you guys are bodybuilders, you know, or looking to go on stage or something like that, or high level performers, for most of you, keep it simple, right? We've got the squat and the hip hinge. What are they doing? Basically everything. They're working everything. And then when we get into the upper body stuff, right, you want some kind of pulling movement, you want some kind of pushing movement, and maybe you could have some kind of shouldery type movement. And that kind of does everything. It does everything. You don't need to be, you know, spending 14 hours in the gym. Most of us don't have that need or requirement. I would strongly suggest, though, as we talk about in the program, stick to doing just the lower back rehab stuff until you've made a good bit of progress on that front, right? You're doing significant loading. I would argue, you know, I don't have a hard and fast rule for this, but certainly looking at like 45% loading, 45% of your body weight on the bar would be a pretty good like milestone to achieve. Why is that relevant? Because generally speaking, when you sit down compared to standing, you're putting anywhere from 20 to 45% of your body weight extra through the spine. So if your rehab is higher than that, then that's kind of like a good milestone to aim for. You want to go further than that. We typically say 75 to 100% for 10 reps, aggravation free on the squats or hip hinges is the target that you are aiming for. But that's something to bear in mind that kind of gets you there. Topots fam says, how many days a week should I be hip hinging at 30 kilos? Yeah, it really depends how frequently you're recovering. How well you're doing to recover between sessions. I think we definitely need to explore aggravation. That needs to be explored, and that needs to be factored in very quickly. So please get into the members area and give us an update on that, Topots fam. But typically speaking, as we start to get to more reasonable loads, you know, we're approaching the 50% mark there. We want to be looking at potentially we're doing like 1 or 2 or 3 heavier sessions a week, maybe a squat, maybe a hip hinge. And then the other sessions are kind of active recovery, maybe some upper body, looking back through that phase 4 strategy material to give you a little bit of guidance on how we're going to be structuring our week, leveraging some of the additional workouts as well if we particularly enjoy training. TR Kindling has says, without imaging, how could you distinguish between back issues or hip issues? At first, it felt like the lower back with sciatica, now it's almost always an outermost or lateral hip or top of the glute. That's generally down to the testing and the aggravating factors, right? So if you strain, if you strain the hip joint, right? Firstly, you don't get primary muscle problems. If you strain the muscle, like for example, I use the example of the biceps tendon rupture, right? To have a muscle issue, generally speaking, you must have done something at a significant level to challenge the muscle beyond that which it was capable of dealing with, and then you get the injury, right? Generally associated with muscle issues, you have significant bruising, etc. That's visible, right? Generally. Obviously, there can be, you know, and it's important to bear in mind that, you know, delayed onset muscle soreness as a result of normal training is a muscle injury of sorts, right? It's just very, very minor, and you're not going to get profuse bruising with that. But muscles recover very, very quickly. Generally speaking, the physical examination is going to be the thing that kind of allows you to better understand whether it is a lower back issue or a hip issue, more so than the imaging, I would suggest, because you might well have issues in both areas, right? And you might well have a more significant objective change in the hip joint than in the lumbar spine. That could be a scenario, right? But it's the lumbar spine injury that's actually bothering you right now. And so generally, you have to remember that you've got the physical examination, the symptoms, the patient history, the thing that the person is struggling with. Then you've got the imaging, and you need to kind of feed that all in together to understand where the problem is coming from. But most of the time, if you've done a good examination, you know that the problem is coming from the lower back or somewhere else, if that's the case, before you've done the imaging. But it's also very normal for lower back issues to refer pain to the gluteal region, to have aching, soreness, stiffness, dysfunction, etc. in this area. And so if you do stuff that objectively challenges the lower back, you will often be able to exacerbate the glute symptoms. Topots Farmer says, does sciatica or back injury cause plantar fasciitis, maybe, or the other way around? I don't think it's a direct cause, but it's not unreasonable to suggest that if you've got any kind of injury that involves you maybe being a little bit more load dominant on one limb over the other, that you might well get a little bit of plantar fasciitis as you're constantly pressing through the other limb, the other leg, straining the arches of the opposing foot. What else have we got? Liana says, I'm stuck on a 10-kilo squat. I end up pulling my neck and shoulder and my upper back is week 2. Sometimes it's the method in which you're doing the squats. Liana, if you're doing a high hold squat as opposed to a low hold squat, you know, those kind of things can be a factor. Switching to a low hold, I wouldn't be doing a high hold. I know we talk about doing the high hold squats to start with, but switching to a low hold squat can be very good, a very good option, and that can really help. Sometimes you guys get stuck at little points, and actually that's where having support to work through that. And it's not a case of there's one answer. It's a case of, okay, go away and try this, go away and try this, and work on this for a little bit and give us a report. That's why we have the support in the members area to help with these kind of things, because everybody will get stuck at different points, and there are different kind of training strategies that help you guys overcome some of these challenges. Sometimes it's up here. Sometimes it's as simple as on the squat, we're doing this. We're kind of like doing this with our neck, right? And they were just jarring our neck. It's nothing to do with the squat itself. It's to do with some peculiarity that we're doing with our neck. And that's the problem, right? Stay Lucky is, I cannot do squats or even tie my shoelaces. No, that's tough. So we just start wherever we start. Everybody starts at a different place when they're talking about their recovery from back injuries. Everybody starts at a different place. But it's just a case of working on aggravation free as best you can with your exercises and with correct choreography. That's the biggest thing you can aim for. Guys, we're going to wrap it up today. Hopefully it's been a helpful one for you guys. Thank you to all of you guys that asked questions, that commented, etc. And just check over here. Yeah, I do hope it's been a helpful one. Thank you to all of you that posted in the comments. I saw some of you guys sharing the live as well. Really appreciate that. We will be back again later this week. I think it's Wednesday that we're going to be live again next. Until then, those of you guys in the members area, it does look as though the maintenance is all finished now. So looks like the site's all back up and running again. We will be continuing. We've got some bits and pieces that we're hopefully going to be rolling out very, very soon, which will be more for you guys in the members area. So that should be really cool. But yes, thank you to all of you guys that joined today. Hope it was helpful, and we will see you guys next time on the live. Take care, guys. Thank you.